Carl Jung discovered something few dare to face, that sometimes the soul's greatest love story begins with its own solitude. The paradox is cruel yet sacred. You were not abandoned, you were chosen to stand alone. For Jung, being single was never a punishment. It was initiation, a sacred pause orchestrated by the unconscious itself to tear you away from imitation, masks, and false attachments, so that you might return, reborn, to the wholeness of the self. Today, I'll take you inside that hidden chamber of Jung's psychology, where the soul learns to transmute loneliness into gold, where divine delay becomes sacred alchemy, and where solitude reveals not what is missing, but what is immortal. When Jung observed his patient's struggles with love and rejection, he noticed a haunting pattern. Those who suffered most from solitude were often the ones nearest to awakening. It was as though the unconscious itself, that vast, divine intelligence beneath thought, refused to let them dilute their energy in half-lived relationships. Their isolation wasn't exile. It was incubation. If you've ever sat awake at night, wondering why every prayer for love seems unanswered, Jung would whisper, "It is not yet time to be seen, because you have not yet seen yourself." The self, as he called it, demands union, but not with another first. With your own soul. He called this process individuation, the journey where you shed the persona, the mask society gave you, and meet the hidden self beneath. To do that, the unconscious must often separate you from the crowd. Strip away distractions, even end relationships that seem perfect, until only silence remains. That silence is the beginning of sacred speech. Imagine, for a moment, that your singleness is not a void, but a forge. The fire of alchemy burns away what you are not. Each failed relationship, each lonely night, each unanswered text, all of it becomes heat. And beneath that flame, something ancient is melting, the false self you built to be loved. Jung wrote that the greatest privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But to become that person, you must first lose every version of yourself that was built to please. That's why the chosen ones, those whose lives carry a deeper calling, cannot force themselves into ordinary love. The unconscious simply won't permit it. It will sabotage every imitation until you surrender to authenticity. Once, Jung treated a woman whose life was filled with fleeting lovers. Each time she met someone, the bond began with fire and ended with collapse. "Why am I always left alone?" she asked. Jung didn't say she was cursed. He said she was being refined. He noticed that in her dreams, a recurring image appeared, a solitary temple in the mountains, glowing from within. That temple, Jung said, is you, until you learn to dwell within it. No visitor can remain. And that's what this journey demands of you, to dwell within your own temple, to sit in your own silence until it stops echoing and starts singing, to realize that what feels like divine rejection is actually divine protection. You see, from Jung's view, every relationship is an exchange of unconscious energy. When two people meet, their shadows meet first. Their unhealed wounds begin to dance long before their hands do, and when one of those shadows is still raw, still bleeding, the relationship becomes not a union but a siphon. Energy begins to drain. Intuition dims. Dreams grow dark. The chosen ones sense this instinctively. Somewhere in your bones, you've always known that not all love is safe, that some connections are beautiful cages, that others, though thrilling, fracture something sacred inside you. And so, again and again, the unconscious intervenes, the wrong ones vanish. The timing collapses, the chemistry burns out before the promise begins, You call it bad luck. Jung called it the hand of the self, the divine architect rearranging your life, so your mission is not diluted. In Jung's language, love is not the merging of two incomplete halves, but the meeting of two whole souls, and wholeness cannot be rushed. That's why this long, quiet season of solitude is not your delay. It's your transformation. If you could see what your soul is doing behind the scenes, you'd fall to your knees in awe. Because in this solitude, you are not waiting. You are being rewritten. Every tear becomes a solvent, dissolving your masks. Every ache of loneliness pulls your attention inward, toward the unconscious that has waited for you since birth. There, beneath the surface of awareness, the real work begins confronting the shadow. The shadow is everything you were told not to be: your anger, your desire, your fear, your secret brilliance. Jung believed that until you face your shadow, you remain a fragment of yourself, destined to repeat cycles of projection, seeking in others what you've disowned within. That's why singleness is sacred. It forces you to stop projecting the hero, the healer, the savior onto others. There's no one left to carry your unlived potential. You are confronted by your own reflection, the mirror of the unconscious, and asked to stay. Stay until the reflection no longer frightens you. Stay until you can hold your own darkness without shame. Stay until the silence turns from punishment into prayer. Because when you finally meet your shadow with compassion, you retrieve the parts of you that love once scattered. You become whole, and in that wholeness, loneliness dissolves. I know that sounds poetic, but Jung meant it literally. He wrote that loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate what seems important to you. The one you seek will not arrive until you can communicate with your own soul, until you've learned the language of dreams, intuition, and symbols. This is why the chosen ones are often dreamers. Your unconscious speaks to you at night, weaving symbols of what the day cannot reveal. Jung called dreams the royal road to the unconscious. So when you dream of old lovers returning, of doors closing, of the vast sea, it is not random. It is the psyche rehearsing your rebirth. In one case, Jung studied a man who dreamt of being swallowed by the ocean. He woke up terrified, but Jung smiled. That is the unconscious reclaiming you, he said. You're being baptized by your own depths. So perhaps this, too, is what's happening to you. Your life dismantling itself, not out of cruelty, but to immerse you in the depths of your own being. And one day, when you rise from those waters, you'll realize you were never waiting for love to arrive. You were waiting for yourself to return. The silence that once wounded you now begins to whisper. At first, it's almost imperceptible, a breath beneath the noise of thought. But as the world outside grows quieter, the unconscious starts to speak in its own strange language symbols. Dreams, coincidences. The stillness becomes a laboratory. Every ache, every memory, every ending that once felt meaningless begins to rearrange itself like pieces of an ancient equation. This is where solitude turns into alchemy. Carl Jung saw it in his patients again and again, the moment when pain becomes process. He realized the psyche behaves like an alchemist's furnace. It burns what is false, so that what is real can emerge. The alchemists called this stage nigrido, the blackening, the disintegration of all that once defined you. The ego calls it failure. The soul calls it refinement. You begin to see the truth hidden behind the chaos. Nothing in your solitude was wasted. The collapsed relationships, The nights you thought were pointless, all of them were ingredients feeding the same sacred fire. In that heat, illusions melt. The idea that love will complete you, that someone else will make you whole, gone. What remains is raw metal, you, unmasked. Jung devoted years to studying those ancient alchemical texts. Not for magic, but for metaphor. He saw that every human being, when stripped of pretense, must face the same fire. No tree, he wrote, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. The descent is necessary. To know your light, you must face the shadow it casts. And so, the chosen one is forced into the underworld of the psyche. Down there is no applause, no affirmation, no partner to mirror your worth. Only mirrors that show what you've hidden. The shadow rage, envy, desire, fear, brilliance, all that was forbidden, now rises to the surface, demanding to be seen. It's terrifying, because the shadow is not a monster, it's you. Unedited, the parts you were taught to exile to survive, the moments you swallowed your voice to be loved, the times you smiled while your soul screamed. In the alchemical fire, these fragments reappear, and though your instinct is to run, you begin to see what Jung saw there is gold buried in the darkness. He called this the opus contra naturam, the work against nature. He goes against every human impulse to stay comfortable, to stay wanted. But this is how the soul grows, not by avoiding pain, but by digesting it until it becomes wisdom. You start to notice that life stops sending the same lessons once you learn to face them consciously. That's the alchemy at work. The moment you stop chasing validation, it ceases to withdraw from you. The moment you no longer beg to be seen, visibility finds you. Energy that once leaked outward now circulates inward, refining you into something rare, a person who no longer needs to be completed. Jung often described individuation as a circular process, the ego orbiting closer and closer to the self, until the two finally fuse. In that fusion, the opposites reconcile, masculine and feminine, strength and softness, reason and emotion, they stop fighting and begin to dance. You realize that the love you've been searching for was always an archetype, an image of the wholeness you were becoming. So, if you feel like life has forced you into a long night of aloneness, understand this: you are in the middle of your alchemical transformation. The world may call it a pause. The unconscious calls it preparation. Still, this process is not gentle. To become whole is to lose every false safety net. You may wake up one day feeling like your identity has dissolved, no roles to play, no one to impress, no predictable narrative to hide inside. That disorientation is sacred. Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." What he didn't add is that pain is intelligent. It breaks you with precision, never randomly. In this breaking, you begin to see your patterns as maps. You remember every time you silenced yourself for love, and how the silence only grew louder. You recall every bond that drained you, and realize they weren't punishments. They were mirrors, showing what you refused to protect. Slowly, solitude becomes sanctuary. When you reach this point, the unconscious begins to shift its role. It no longer dismantles. It starts to rebuild. Dreams return, not chaotic this time, but lucid. You begin to sense a new kind of peace that doesn't depend on anyone's presence. The emptiness that once terrified you becomes an inner cathedral. That's when synchronicities appear small, eerie alignments, that lets you know you're no longer wandering blindly. You see a word, a symbol, a song repeating across days. You meet someone briefly, and they speak the exact truth you were hiding from. These are not coincidences. They are the psyche's way of saying the inner and outer worlds are syncing. The alchemy is nearly complete. And you realize, perhaps for the first time, that being single was never about waiting for another person. It was about learning to stand still long enough for your soul to recognize itself. From this center, love will not enter as rescue. It will enter as resonance, because when two whole beings meet, it's not chemistry anymore. It's ignition, a sacred combustion that creates light strong enough to guide others. The chosen one does not chase that meeting. They magnetize it, not through longing, but through alignment. And yet, before the sacred union can happen, one more passage remains, learning to protect the gold you forged to walk the world as someone whole, not hungry. That is where the real test begins. It begins quietly, the moment when your solitude no longer feels like isolation, but sovereignty. You sense a new equilibrium in your body, a subtle gravity that no longer pulls toward absence. What used to ache now radiates. You are not reaching outward anymore. Life starts to reach toward you. But this new state is fragile, and Jung warned that every transformation, if unguarded, risks regression. The gold must be protected, or it corrodes back into lead. This is where boundaries are born. Not the walls of bitterness, but the sacred lines of clarity. Boundaries are not separation, they are containment. The vessel that keeps your alchemy pure. Before, you loved by dissolving, by becoming what others needed so that you could be chosen. You mistook absorption for intimacy, self-erasure for love. But the alchemist who has found gold cannot pour it out to anyone who knocks. The vessel must be sealed. Jung wrote that wholeness is not achieved by perfection, but by integration, the acceptance of all parts. And with acceptance comes responsibility. You must protect what you've integrated, not scatter it. You begin to say no, not with anger, but with knowing. No to what drains your light. No to what disguises control as love. No to anything that asks you to shrink. And each no becomes a silent prayer. I remember who I am now. At first, people won't recognize this version of you. They were used to the one who bent, who gave endlessly, who confused empathy with self-sacrifice. But as you hold your boundaries, the air around you changes. Those who feed on weakness drift away. Those who vibrate with integrity draw near. This is the stage Jung called the integration of the shadow, not destroying darkness, but giving it a place at the table. You no longer exile your anger. You channel it into discernment. You no longer fear loneliness. You use it as signal, your soul's way of warning that you've stepped out of alignment. Your emotions stop being enemies and become instruments. One evening, perhaps while walking alone or staring at the soft light over the city, it hits you. You are at peace. Not because everything is perfect, but because you no longer need it to be. From here, the sacred timing begins to unfold. Jung believed the unconscious is not limited by time. It arranges encounters long before you understand why. And so, when you are ready, the orchestration begins. Coincidencias sharpen into precision. Paths that once diverged begin to converge. Maybe it starts as a conversation, an unplanned meeting, an eye contact that feels strangely ancient. You don't hesitate. You simply recognize it. The energy is calm, not frantic, There's no performance, no desperation, only resonance. The kind that hums in the bones and whispers, "This is familiar." But this meeting is different from what you imagined. It doesn't rescue you, it reflects you. It doesn't demand your halves, it meets your wholeness. Jung called this the conjunctio, the union of opposites, the final phase of alchemy where sun and moon, masculine and feminine, shadow and light merge to create gold. Psychologically, it is the outer reflection of your inner union. You'll notice how natural it feels, because this time, you are not falling in love, you are standing in it. This love doesn't erupt, it aligns. It is two individuated souls, recognizing in each other the same sacred journey, the same fire, the same peace. And even if this union comes years after the waiting, you will understand why every door before had to close. Those endings were not rejections, they were redirections. Every almost was a safeguard. Every silence was the divine hand shielding your energy until it matured into light that no wrong bond could dim. For Jung, synchronicity was the signature of divine order, the proof that the psyche and cosmos are one fabric. When your inner world becomes coherent, the outer begins to echo it. So when this union arrives, you won't need to ask, "Is this the one?" The knowing will be cellular. You will feel it not as intoxication, but as stillness, not as adrenaline, but as recognition. Because love at this level is not possession, it is mission. Two mature souls joining paths not to complete each other, but to amplify the light of what they already are. That's why you were kept single all this time, not because you were unworthy, but because your union carries purpose. The world does not need another romance. It needs conscious alliances, two awakened beings whose love creates ripples of healing around them. And when that time comes, you will understand the full circle of your solitude. You were never waiting for love. Love was waiting for you to become yourself. The night you once cursed as endless was only the chrysalis. The silence was not abandonment, it was instruction. And the loneliness was not punishment, it was preparation. Now you stand at the threshold not as half, but as whole. You have touched your shadow, walked through the fire, and emerged as gold. And when you love now, it will not be out of fear of being alone. It will be from the joy of being found by someone who speaks the same ancient language of becoming. If you recognize this journey within your own story, remember what you call delay. The divine calls design. Your solitude was sacred. Your becoming was never in vain. And your timing perfectly orchestrated. If this message awakens something in you, comment below, "I am becoming whole." Your transformation is not just for yourself, but for the healing of everyone still learning to rise from their own solitude. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.
There are certain beings who seem to slip into this life through a door that is slightly ajar between the seen and the unseen. You may call them sensitive, empathic, intuitive. The poet whispers that they are touched. The mystic insists they are gifted. But I will speak of them as they truly are souls born too close to the veil. They come into the world carrying more than their share of light and shadow, as if their bodies were tuned not only to the tangible world, but also to the reverberations of the invisible. For such individuals, reality is never flat. It does not end with what is apparent, with what can be weighed, touched, or named. Reality for them trembles with another layer, a shimmering presence just beyond appearances. This dual vision is both a burden and a calling. I have met many of these souls in my life. They walk with a kind of softness, as though even the ground beneath their feet is fragile. They listen more than they speak. They often cry where others laugh, feel ruptures where others only notice silence. They carry too much of the world within themselves, not because they are broken, but because their boundaries are porous, their skin thin to the marrow of things. The wind, the tone of a stranger's voice, the flicker of an eye. These are not small details to them. These are revelations, entire stories whispered in a moment. Yet in a world that rewards armor calculation and detachment, such receptivity is seen not as a strength, but as a liability. And so they are told they are weak when in fact they are overflowing. The highly sensitive soul does not merely feel emotions, they are porous to the unconscious. They absorb what others repress, what entire groups of people discard. They pick up the fragments scattered by the collective psyche, the sorrow, the rage, the terror no one else wants to acknowledge. They take it in unknowingly, like sponges absorbing the spilled ink of humanity. That is why they are so often exhausted. That is why they retreat into solitude, not because they dislike people, but because they are carrying too many of them at once. This sensitivity is not only personal, it is archetypal. Their dreams are haunted and illuminated by figures of myth, animals that speak, old women who watch children, who lead them through impossible landscapes, fires and floods, deaths and births. Their psyche is mythic, alchemical, alive with symbols that the rational mind dismisses. And yet, because they lack a language for this inner theater, they begin to think something is wrong with them. They are told they are too emotional, too soft, too intense, too much. But I must tell you, nothing is wrong with them. What they experience is real, and it has purpose. Yet it is dangerous too. Yes, dangerous. I say this without hesitation. The sensitive soul, if not rooted in the self, if not protected by knowledge, if not stabilized through inner work, can be swallowed whole by the very depths they are called to navigate. Carl Jung himself left us a hidden warning scattered throughout his writings, a breadcrumb trail for those willing to see. The more sensitive you are to the unconscious, the greater the danger of being devoured by it. For the unconscious does not differentiate between what is yours and what belongs to the world. It does not whisper gently, "This grief is not yours. It belongs to another." No. It hands it all to you as if to say, "Here is what has been repressed. Here is what must be seen." And the sensitive, if untrained, if unaware, will believe that everything they feel belongs to them. They will carry sadness that is not their sadness, but the grief of generations. They will tremble with fear that is not their fear, but the anxiety of an entire room. They will mistake the world's wounds for their own identity, and in this confusion they risk dissolving into chaos. I recall a young man, 24 years old, who came to me trembling. He had not slept well in years. He confessed that when he entered a church he wept. When he stood beside a dying tree, he wept again. He could not explain why. He felt ashamed. "I'm too sensitive," he told me. "I can't function." Yet when he spoke of his dreams, I saw the truth. His nights were filled with abundant symbols, angels feeding him soil, wolves licking wounds that were not his cities collapsing while he stood unharmed at their center. I told him, "You are not sick. You are a vessel, but no one has taught you how to hold." And so we began not the work of removing his sensitivity, but of bringing it into consciousness. This is the key. Sensitivity that remains unconscious manifests as suffering. But sensitivity made conscious becomes vision. If you are highly sensitive, hear me. You are not here to fit neatly into the world as it is. You are here to feel what others avoid, to hear what others silence, to see what others deny. But you cannot do this blindly, and you cannot do it alone. Otherwise you will be consumed. There comes a stage in every sensitive soul's journey where the weight becomes too much. Darkness accumulates, absorbed from all directions, and the soul becomes waterlogged. Light cannot pass through. It appears outwardly as depression, anxiety, unexplained illness, or what we call a spiritual emergency. This is not failure. This is initiation. The unconscious has chosen you as its vessel, and now it demands transformation. At such times, the outer world begins to echo the inner chaos. Dreams intensify. Synchronicities multiply. Encounters feel strange, losses mount, awakenings startle. Nothing feels stable. This is where many break. Some numb themselves with distractions. Some fragment, losing themselves in endless roles. Some retreat into persona, smiling and pretending everything is fine. But a few, a rare few, surrender to the descent. They do not fall into despair, but into depth. They begin the sacred work of individuation, the journey Jung called the path toward the self. This descent is no metaphor. It is an experiential truth. The ancients called it catabasis, the journey into the underworld. For the sensitive, it often takes the shape of dreams filled with tunnels, basements, caves, staircases without end, drowning waters, or being buried alive. These are not hallucinations. They are invitations. They beckon you to confront what has been buried not only in your personal life but in the collective field of humanity. Do not fear these symbols. They are not punishments. They are initiations. The sensitive person is not only feeling their own wounds, they are tuning into the silenced wounds of culture itself. Their body becomes the mirror of society's forgotten soul. They tremble because the world trembles through them. They ache because the collective ache has found a vessel. But unless they learn the structure of the self, unless they ground themselves in something deeper than feeling, they will drift endlessly between others' pain and their own confusion. And so they begin to cling to roles: healer, empath, mediator, peacemaker. These roles give temporary identity, but they are masks insufficient to bear the full weight of the soul, for only the self can hold it. The self is not the ego, not who you think you are. It is the totality of who you are, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, wound and wisdom, masculine and feminine. And for the sensitive soul, discovering the self is not luxury, it is survival. I once worked with a woman who dreamt she was swallowed by the earth. In her dream, she was at a dinner party, smiling politely, speaking with acquaintances, when suddenly the ground beneath her feet gave way. She fell unnoticed while the others continued eating. She landed in a cavernous, womb-like chamber. There, in the shadows, an ancient figure appeared and began painting symbols on her skin. She wept upon waking. She did not understand. But I told her, "You are not being buried. You are being reborn. Your sensitivity has carried you as far as it could on its own. Now the unconscious is initiating you into a deeper pattern. That mysterious figure painting in silence was not an intruder. It was the self reclaiming her from the persona, the mask she had worn too long. This is the essence of the journey for the sensitive soul. You are not meant to escape the world, nor to carry it endlessly upon your shoulders. You are meant to enter the world through your own soul, which means cultivating boundaries. Without boundaries, sensitivity becomes mere absorption, a flooding of one's psyche with everything foreign. But with boundaries, sensitivity transforms into intuition. You are not here to carry others. You are here to see them. You are not here to rescue the world. You are here to mirror it, especially its forgotten and denied parts. But this requires immense discipline, not the discipline of repression, but the discipline of discernment. The first question for the sensitive one is always this: what is mine and what is not? What am I truly feeling and what am I receiving? Where do I end and where does the other begin? The dream becomes your greatest teacher here. It is the soul's secret language, its way of correcting imbalance. If you are giving too much, you may dream of leaking vessels, flooding rooms, or open wounds that will not close. If you are being invaded psychically, you may dream of strangers in your house, unlocked doors, or wild animals staring through the glass. These are not random. They are instructions. The unconscious does not merely speak, it insists. And when you learn to listen, it begins to heal. Write your dreams. Speak them. Let their images live inside you, for they are not superstition. They are myth, alive in the bloodstream, messages sent from the deep sea of the collective unconscious. And if you honor them over time, something extraordinary begins to happen. The symbols shift. Where once you dreamed of floods, you now see rivers. Where once you saw open wounds, you see scars. Where once strangers broke into your house, now guides arrive at your door. The unconscious responds to relationship. It longs not only to disrupt you, but to collaborate with you. It wants to be seen, And when you stop drowning in its waters and begin instead to swim with awareness, it transforms from predator to partner. At this point, the sensitive soul begins to change. The world itself does not become easier, but you change. You begin to notice when an emotion is not yours. You no longer absorb everything by default. You choose what to engage with. You begin to honor the signals of your body, the metaphors of your dreams, the wisdom of your intuition. Slowly, gently, almost imperceptibly, at first you begin to feel something rare, a center. Not an idea of who you are, not an identity borrowed from a role, but a living presence deep within. This is the self, and from that center, your sensitivity ceases to be a burden. It becomes a gift. Not a blunt instrument that overwhelms, but a precise instrument finely tuned. You no longer react to every ripple of energy around you. You respond only to what is true. This, I must emphasize, changes everything. For most of the world is blind to its inner life. Most of the world has forgotten it even has a soul. But you were born to feel it, not as a victim, as a mirror. But first you must look inward, must make yourself the first reflection, must enter the labyrinth of your own psyche. Only then can your sensitivity reveal its true nature. Once you have seen the necessity of dissent and the wisdom of boundaries, not to shut the world out, but to let the self in you must be prepared for what comes next. For when the unconscious recognizes that you are listening, that you are no longer fleeing from your dreams, but walking into them with reverence, it changes its language. It no longer pursues you with symbols of collapse and destruction. Instead, it courts you with symbols of becoming. The highly sensitive one who has endured the first descent begins to experience life as charged with meaning. Every encounter, every relationship, every sensation carries a hidden resonance. This is not mere imagination. This is the archetypal field awakening. You begin to see what Jung meant when he said, "We are living myth without knowing it." You recognize that your life has always been a symbolic journey. Every threshold, every loss, every love has been an initiation. The sensitive soul is born closer to the membrane between the personal story and the collective story. This is why you often feel like an outsider, not because you don't belong, but because you already sense the myth beneath the surface, the hidden narrative the world has forgotten. And once you glimpse this, your sensitivity begins to anchor you rather than drown you. You stop asking only, "Why do I feel this?" and begin asking, "What does this mean?" For your feelings when aligned with the self are not just emotional, they are oracular. Your nervous system becomes an antenna, and when tuned to the right frequency, it no longer paralyzes you but guides you. Yet the path is not always tranquil. There is a deeper initiation, a darker archetype. Every sensitive soul must meet the archetype of the wounded seer. This is the one who sees too much, feels too much, and must carry that vision in a world that does not want to know. This is the true cross of the empath, not that you feel, but that you must bear witness. To bear witness is no small thing. It means naming what others deny, feeling the ghost that others banish, dreaming of what is to come, even when no one believes you. And yet, if the soul has called you here, you must answer, not with martyrdom, but with conscious participation. For the dream will change again as it always does. The dark figures will give way to guides. The forest will no longer seem endless. It will become navigable. The cave will not feel like a tomb, but a womb. The flood will not destroy, but baptize. These are signs that you have crossed a threshold. You are no longer merely sensitive. You are becoming initiated. Yet here is the paradox. The closer one draws to the self, the more solitude descends. To awaken to the inner life is to feel sometimes painfully how far much of the world has strayed from its own soul. You walk with vision in a land where many remain asleep. You see symbols where others see only surfaces. You hear what is repressed in the voices of strangers, and you know without wishing to that much of humanity hides behind masks. It has mistaken for identity. This loneliness is not punishment. It is the mark of initiation. Jung warned that the individuation journey, though universal in its demand, is rarely chosen. Most cling to persona, to the shallow safety of roles, to the false promise of fitting in. But for the sensitive soul who has endured descent, the path cannot be reversed. Once you have glimpsed the myth beneath appearances, you cannot return to blindness. The old world will still beckon you to explain yourself, to justify, to shrink back into simplicity. But you have become complex, and your complexity is sacred. Do not resent those who are not ready to live this way. They are you in another time at an earlier stage. Their projection, their dismissal, their laughter at your tears. These are defenses against truths they are not yet prepared to bear. You must not fall into bitterness. Your task is not to convince. Your task is to embody, to live with such presence, such clarity, such integrity that your very being becomes a mirror. In that mirror, others may glimpse themselves more fully. This is the role of the conscious, sensitive soul in the modern world, to re-enchant it, not through doctrine, not through preaching, but through the aliveness of being itself. Your dreams become scripture. Your body becomes temple. Your silence becomes prayer. Even your pain becomes alchemical fire, the forge in which fragments of the self are joined into wholeness. Few survive this unchanged. Those who do return no longer as who they were, but as who they are. Their presence itself carries the weight of truth. It is a quiet truth, the kind that cannot be argued, only felt. They become what Jung called living symbols, embodiments of the collective psyche's longing to heal itself. And yet, even for the initiated, the work is not complete. For there remains the final and most delicate challenge to return to the world without losing the soul's depth. It is one thing to awaken. It is another to remain awake in a society that constantly lulls its children back to sleep. The pull of persona is strong. The temptation to retreat into roles healer, guide, visionary is subtle. Even the sacred can become a disguise if it serves only to avoid the deeper demand of presence. To remain awake is to walk through the market, the office, the family dinner, while holding silently the myth that underlies it all. It is to allow mystery to shine through the mundane without needing to name it aloud. It is to speak less often, but with a voice that carries weight, because it flows not from persona, but from self. And here lies the warning whispered only to those who have descended and risen. Your sensitivity is no longer about you. It is no longer the fragile wound you believed it to be, nor the identity you once clung to. It is now the instrument through which the self meets the world. Not to dominate it, not to flee from it, but to witness it. To witness is everything. The unconscious demands recognition. The collective shadow ignored too long cries out to be seen. When you, as a conscious, sensitive soul, look upon the world without flinching, you become the mirror in which it remembers its forgotten depths. That is the task. That is the service. But service does not mean endless sacrifice. The medicine you carry is not in what you do, but in what you are. A sensitive soul who has passed through fire and water, who has endured descent and learned the language of symbols, is dangerous to illusions. They cannot be manipulated by shallow persuasion. They cannot be bought by hollow rewards. They cannot be made small again. Their silence unsettles. Their gaze reveals. Their presence disrupts the lie that reality is only what appears. This is why your life becomes symbolic, not as metaphor, but as truth. Every gesture, every choice, every refusal to betray your center ripples outward. The world shifts even slightly in your presence, not because you force it, but because you embody a different rhythm, a rhythm attuned to the self. The self is not an abstraction. It is not an idea of who you are. It is the living root of your being, the center that binds together conscious and unconscious, shadow and light, personal and collective. It is the axis around which your sensitivity orbits, no longer lost in endless absorption, but precise, discerning, alive. If you have survived the descent, if you have endured long enough to feel the rhythm of the unconscious in your own breath, then know this: you are no longer fragile. You are feral. You are no longer reactive. You are responsive. You are no longer broken. You are whole. And in your wholeness, there is space for the world not to be carried on your shoulders, but to be held in your witness. That is enough, and that is everything. So go now not back into performance, but forward into presence. The old impulse to prove yourself, to justify your sensitivity, to translate your inner life into terms the world can digest, let it fall away. You do not need to explain what has been forged in silence in dreams in the long nights of descent. The self does not argue for its reality. It radiates. Let your dreams continue to speak, for they are scripture older than any written word. Let your body continue to guide you, for it is the vessel where psyche and matter meet. Let your silence carry weight, for in silence the soul gathers its strength. And let your pain, once a wound that threatened to undo you, burn now as the alchemical fire through which all fragments are fused into a single, luminous whole. The world will still tempt you to betray this. It will offer you roles to hide in distractions, to numb with doctrines, to shrink your mystery into certainty. But the soul does not forget its journey. Once you have walked the spiral path inward and stood before the self, the person you once were cannot return. That one was built to survive. But now you are called to live. Here is the final quiet warning. Your sensitivity is no longer about you. It is not a private wound to be managed, nor a badge to be worn. It is now the instrument through which the self encounters the world. You are a bearer of images, a carrier of symbol, a weaver of meaning. The world will still insist on efficiency, simplicity, clarity. But you are none of these things. You are layered, intricate, archetypal. You have become a vessel for the entire human story, the desirable and the exiled, the luminous and the shadowed. The wound that once isolated you is now a threshold. The dreams that once terrified you are now instruction. The fire that once consumed you now illuminates your path. You may still tremble, but your trembling is no longer weakness. It is presence. And that presence is precisely how you serve. Not by doing more, not by rescuing all, not by dissipating yourself in endless availability, but by standing rooted in your own myth, in your own soul's truth. For a sensitive soul who has walked into darkness and emerged bearing light is a rare and dangerous being. Dangerous not in violence, but in clarity. Dangerous because they cannot be seduced by illusion. They cannot be made small again. Their gaze carries weight. Their silence unmasks falsehoods. Their life becomes a kind of scripture written not in words, but in the symbolic gesture of being. This is not grandiosity. This is the mystery of the incarnated self. The self is not merely you, it is more than you. It is the wholeness from which your sensitivity draws not sorrow, but vision, not overwhelm, but clarity, not suffering, but strength. It is the ancient source that sustains your presence in the world. And so, if you are one who has endured, if you have descended into shadow and risen through symbol, then know this: you are not too much. You are not fragile. You are the mirror, the myth, the medicine. You are what the world has forgotten it needed. The task now is to live from that center, to walk through the ordinary days, through conversations, through routines, through work and love, while carrying the extraordinary awareness that everything shimmers with meaning. You do not need to declare this aloud. You need only live it. The self speaks through presence more than through words. This is how cultures are healed, not by doctrine imposed, but by lives lived with integrity. The conscious, sensitive person moving quietly through the world embodies the forgotten depth of the collective soul. Their dreams are not only their own, they are for the world. Their silence is not absence, it is prayer. Their gaze is not judgment, it is remembrance. The world may not understand you, but the world is moved by you nonetheless. For in your presence, even slightly, the sleeping begin to stir. The rigid feel something soften. The broken glimpse the possibility of wholeness. This is your service, not to fix, but to reflect, not to carry, but to witness, not to numb, but to awaken. So walk with dignity. Walk with quiet fire. Walk knowing that every step is symbolic, that your life itself is myth unfolding. And in your myth, others may rediscover their own. And yet the path does not end here. For even when you have glimpsed the self, even when you have endured the catabasis and felt the fire of transformation, the world will still demand that you forget. This is the last and most subtle challenge, the call to return to the world without being absorbed by its amnesia. It is easier perhaps to remain in the underworld or in the mountaintop vision, to dwell among dreams and symbols where meaning saturates every breath. But individuation is not escape. It is return. To remain cloistered in visions is to remain incomplete. The soul demands that what has been realized inwardly must be lived outwardly, embodied in gesture and word and presence. Otherwise, it risks dissolving again into fantasy. This is why the ancients spoke not only of descent, but of return. Orpheus did not descend into Hades to stay there. He descended to emerge changed. The mystic does not dissolve into God to remain dissolved. They return carrying the divine spark into the ordinary. Likewise, the sensitive soul must return not as they were, but as who they have become. To return is delicate work, for modern culture is built to lure the awakened back into sleep. The noise of commerce, the insistence on productivity, the endless performance of identity, all of these seduce you back into persona. The danger is not that you will lose your vision. The danger is that you will explain it away. Translate it into language too shallow for mystery, dress it up as mere self-help, or hide it in order to belong again. But the self does not allow regression for long. Once awakened, it resists confinement. It will remind you, sometimes painfully, that you are no longer who you were. The roles that once defined you will feel unbearably narrow. The conversations that once entertained you will feel empty. The ambitions that once drove you will feel hollow. This, too, is initiation. And so the sensitive person who has survived descent carries now a double vision. They live in the world, but they also live in myth. They participate in the ordinary, but they also see the symbolic beneath it. They may be speaking to a friend, yet they hear the archetype speaking through the friend's voice. They may be walking through a city street, yet they feel the pulse of an ancient ritual beneath the neon lights. This is not delusion. It is perception, widened by initiation. But here is where Jung's teaching deepens the paradox. The more closely you align with the self, the more the archetypes themselves test you. For the archetypes are not merely images, they are living forces. They court you, challenge you, tempt you to inflate yourself with their power. The healer archetype whispers, "You must save the world." The sage archetype tempts, "You must be the guide for all." The lover insists, "You must give yourself away endlessly." But these are still masks, still fragments. If you cling to them, you remain bound. Only by holding the tension, by remembering that you are not the archetype, but the vessel through which it flows, do you remain whole. This is why humility is not optional for the initiated soul. Without humility, sensitivity curdles into inflation, and the mystic becomes the fanatic. The true mystic, the true sensitive who has endured, is marked not by grandeur, but by groundedness. They do not need to proclaim, they embody. They do not need to shine above others. They shine through others by seeing them more deeply than they see themselves. They do not escape the human, they incarnate it more fully. And in this incarnation, sensitivity reveals its final secret. It was never fragility at all. It was always the instrument of the self waiting to be tuned. What once seemed unbearable becomes guidance. What once felt like drowning becomes baptism. What once was chaos becomes pattern. The world will not reward this. The world may not even notice it. But the soul does not care for recognition. Its only demand is fidelity to itself, to its mystery, to its depth. Fidelity in the face of a culture that constantly betrays its own soul is no small act. It is rebellion, it is service, it is love. So if you return carrying this awareness, know that you are walking a narrow bridge. You must not retreat into the safety of persona, but neither must you inflate into archetypal grandiosity. You must walk the middle path, the path of embodiment. It is not glamorous, it is not always visible, but it is real. And the real is what saves. The path deepens still. For to live as a conscious, sensitive soul is not to be spared suffering. It is to be entrusted with it. You will still feel the wounds of others, but you will no longer mistake them for your own. You will still be moved by the grief of the world, but you will no longer drown in it. You will still be pierced by the cruelty of indifference, but you will also see the hidden patterns that weave through it, the archetypal currents beneath human blindness. This is the archetype of the wounded seer, the one who feels not simply for themselves, but for the whole, who bears witness to what others repress. To carry this role is not to wallow in sorrow nor to collapse beneath its weight, but to stand as a threshold through which the silenced may find voice. The sensitive soul sees what others cannot bear to see, and to see without turning away is itself a sacred act. To bear witness means to stand in the room where the ghosts hover unspoken and to name them silently. It means to hear beneath a person's words the deeper story straining to be told. It means to dream of what is to come and not always be believed, yet to carry that vision nonetheless. It is a cross, yes, but it is also a vocation. And when you accept this vocation consciously, the unconscious shifts once more. The figures of your dreams change character. The threatening strangers become guides. The monstrous beasts become companions. The cave that once entombed you becomes a womb that shelters you. The flood that once drowned you becomes a baptism that renews you. These are signs that the unconscious no longer treats you as prey, but as participant. You have ceased to be its victim and have become its ally. At this stage, the sensitive soul is not merely surviving sensitivity. They are shaping it, directing it, weaving it into meaning. They begin to realize that every encounter is charged with archetype. The beloved is not only a lover, but an embodiment of the anima, or animus. The rival is not merely an obstacle, but a shadow figure. The elder is not simply old, but carries the mantle of the wise old man or woman. Life itself becomes theater, not in the sense of falsity, but in the sense that each moment is symbolic, each role a mask through which the archetypes gaze. This recognition does not lead to detachment, but to a deeper compassion. For to see others as archetypal is not to diminish their humanity. It is to expand it. It is to realize that behind every argument, every wound, every silence, there is something vast at work, the collective unconscious seeking expression. And here sensitivity ceases to be a private matter and becomes cultural. The sensitive soul becomes the living membrane between personal experience and collective history. They feel not only their own sorrow, but the sorrow of an age, the ache of generations, the silence of ancestors. They are oracles of the unspoken, carrying what has been denied into visibility. But with this comes the temptation to despair. For when you feel the world's wounds so vividly, it is easy to believe nothing can change. Here again the archetypes test you. Will you collapse under the weight of humanity's shadow? Or will you recognize that your task is not to heal the whole world, but to witness it, to hold it in consciousness? For consciousness itself is healing. To look into shadow without turning away is already to begin its transformation. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The sensitive soul who has accepted their vocation embodies this. They do not flee darkness, nor do they glorify it. They face it with presence, and in that presence something shifts. And yet, even here, the paradox remains: the closer you come to wholeness, the more alone you may feel. For most of the world is not ready to live with this depth. Most still seek distraction, still cling to persona, still numb themselves against the soul's demand. You must not resent them. They are simply asleep, and you too once slept. Your task is not to awaken them by force. It is to embody wakefulness so fully that your presence becomes an invitation, a mirror, a reminder. For the sensitive soul who embodies the self does not proselytize. They radiate. Their silence becomes instruction. Their gaze becomes initiation. Their life itself becomes symbol. And symbols once lived are contagious. At last we come to the final movement of the journey, the return to the world as a bearer of wholeness. It is one thing to descend into shadow and rise again through symbol. It is another to remain faithful to that awakening in a world that resists depth at every turn. This, I have found, is the most delicate task of all. For the collective dream of modern life is shallow. It tells us to consume rather than contemplate, to perform rather than embody, to forget rather than remember. To live awake within such a dream is to feel always a quiet estrangement. And yet this estrangement is not exile. It is initiation. You are not banished from the world. You are called to carry soul into it. The sensitive soul who has passed through descent no longer trembles as before. They may still feel deeply, but their feelings have become instruments of discernment rather than waves that drown them. They may still ache with the sorrow of others, but now they hold it with presence rather than absorption. They may still sense the ghosts in the room, but now they recognize them as archetypal messengers rather than personal torments. This is the fruit of individuation, to live in the world without being devoured by it. To walk in markets and offices and families while carrying silently the mythic awareness that all of this is symbolic, all of this is soul speaking in disguise. You do not need to announce this. You need only live it. Your life itself becomes initiation for those around you. For a sensitive soul who has endured the alchemical fire is no longer fragile. They are not reactive but responsive, not broken but whole. And in that wholeness there is space enough for the world not to be carried, but to be witnessed. Witness is everything. For in being seen, the collective unconscious stirs. In being held, the unspoken begins to find its voice. Do not underestimate the power of such presence. A single individual rooted in their self is more dangerous to illusion than armies of the distracted. They cannot be bought. They cannot be manipulated. They cannot be made small again. Their silence unsettles. Their gaze reveals. Their life becomes myth incarnate, not in metaphor, but in living truth. This is no grandiosity. It is mystery. The self once embodied radiates beyond the individual. It is you, but more than you. It is the eternal root from which your sensitivity draws clarity instead of confusion, strength instead of sorrow, vision instead of despair. It is the field of awareness that remembers its origin shining through your finite form. So if you have survived this journey, if you have descended and risen, if you have learned to hold your dreams, to honor your body, to listen to the voice of silence, know this: you are not too much. You are precisely what the world forgot it needed. You are the mirror in which others may glimpse their own soul. You are the myth that reminds them that life itself is sacred. You are the medicine born of your own suffering transfigured into presence. You may still tremble, but now you tremble with presence, not fragility. You may still weep, but now your tears are prayer, not collapse. You may still feel the weight of the world, but now you hold it as witness, not as burden. Go then not backward into performance, but forward into presence. Let your dreams continue to speak. Let your silence continue to weigh. Let your gaze continue to reveal. And let your soul, ancient, luminous, indivisible, shine quietly on behalf of all those who still believe they are too much. For you are not too much. You are precisely enough. You are what the world has forgotten and what it longs to remember. You are the mirror. You are the myth. You are the medicine. And now you are free. You sense it already, don't you? That quiet pull within you, subtle yet undeniable. The call to awaken, the invitation to walk toward the hidden depths of your own being. This is not just self-improvement, not just another surface layer of change. What you are being summoned to is a deeper transformation, what Carl Jung called individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming whole. You feel the weight of the persona you've been wearing, the mask carefully shaped for the world. The mask that tells others who you are, that lets you survive, be accepted, admired, even loved. Yet somewhere in the silence of your own soul, you know that mask is not the whole truth. Behind it something restless moves, a question without words, a longing for what is hidden. And though you have played the part for years, you are no longer satisfied with a performance. You are searching for the one who watches behind the mask. This is where Jung begins his work, with the recognition that the self we present is not the self in its fullness. He does not condemn the persona, it has its place. It allows society to function, it gives us roles and identities. But when the mask hardens, when you forget that you are more than the role you play, the soul begins to ache. That ache is the first sign of awakening. You feel it as restlessness, discontent, even despair. But in truth, it is the whisper of the self calling you back into wholeness. And when you answer, you begin to see the shadow. This is the part of you the persona never wanted the world to know. the parts repressed, denied, exiled, your anger, your envy, your fear, but also your lost vitality, your neglected talents, your unlived life. The shadow is not evil. It is everything you could not yet bear to see, and so you projected it outward onto others, imagining the darkness was theirs. But Jung tells us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Notice how that lands within you. All the judgments, the conflicts, the people who trigger you most deeply, they are mirrors. They are fragments of your own shadow, disowned and waiting. To walk the path of individuation, you must turn toward this shadow not as enemy, but as teacher. Every time you feel resistance, every time your heart clenches in judgment or fear, there is an invitation to meet the part of yourself you once rejected. The shadow returns not to destroy you, but to restore you. And when you begin this turning, something extraordinary happens. You realize that you are not just a collection of masks and shadows. You are not merely the roles you play, nor the wounds you hide. Beneath it all, there is a deeper center, what Jung called the self. The self is not the ego. The ego is small, fragile, grasping for certainty. The self is vast, radiant, both conscious and unconscious. It is the whole of who you are, the still point around which your being turns. And the call to individuation is the call to align with this deeper self, to let it guide your unfolding. You may feel the stirrings of dreams in this process, night visions that confuse or disturb, that slip away upon waking, yet leave you with a strange aftertaste. Jung believed dreams are the voice of the unconscious speaking in symbols. They are not random. They are the messages of the self, clothed in images you must learn to read with the heart as much as with the mind. A recurring figure, a landscape, a confrontation. Each holds meaning. Each holds a fragment of your wholeness, waiting to be integrated. Perhaps you dream of someone who seems entirely other, a mysterious woman, a compelling man, a figure who both fascinates and unsettles. These are not mere fantasies. Jung called them the anima and animus, the inner feminine in man, the inner masculine in woman. They are bridges between your conscious identity and the vast unconscious within. They appear when the soul is ready to expand, when you are prepared to balance what you have neglected in yourself. To resist them is to remain split. To engage them consciously is to step toward integration. And so individuation is not escape, not withdrawal into the clouds. It is descent into the very depths of your being, a confrontation with the fragments you have lost, denied, or feared. It is the courage to face your inner darkness and the humility to recognize that what you despise in others is also within you. It is the willingness to see that every wound carries an image of healing, every descent a seed of ascent. The self guides you through polarity into wholeness, where light and shadow, masculine and feminine, conscious and unconscious, all take their rightful place in the great circle of your being. This path is not linear. It is not fast. It does not flatter the ego, but it awakens you to a depth of aliveness that the persona could never sustain. It draws you into alignment with a center greater than your fragile self-image, and when you begin to live from that center, you notice the world shifting. Relationships deepen conflicts, soften meaning returns to places once empty. Life begins to feel less like a battlefield of masks and more like a dialogue between your soul and the great mystery that surrounds you. Already as you listen, you may sense the stirring, a recognition that these words are not new to you, they are reminders of something you have always known. The longing you feel is not weakness. It is the self remembering itself through you. And the more you listen, the more you allow the unconscious to speak, the closer you move to the wholeness you have always carried. So pause here. Feel the quiet resonance within. Notice what stirs, what resists, what longs to be heard. This is the beginning of individuation, not an idea, a movement of the soul. The deeper you step into this inner terrain, the more you begin to realize how much of your life has been shaped not by conscious choice, but by invisible patterns, projections born from your unconscious. You thought you were seeing others clearly, responding to them as they are. But gradually you notice much of what you see in them is colored by what you cannot yet face in yourself. The anger that flares, the envy that gnaws, the fascination that grips you beyond reason, these are not only about the other, they are mirrors of your own psyche. Projection is the unconscious casting of your inner material onto the outer world. You place your unlived story upon the people who cross your path. You imagine salvation in a lover authority, in a leader villainy, in an enemy. But these figures are not the full truth of themselves. They carry fragments of your unintegrated self. Jung saw this with piercing clarity, that until you withdraw your projections, you cannot see the world as it is, nor yourself as you are. The outer drama will continue endlessly until you dare to reclaim what belongs to you. This realization can be unsettling. You may resist it, clinging to the conviction that others truly are as you have judged them. And yes, they have their own reality, their own flaws and gifts. But the disproportionate intensity of your reactions, the way someone haunts you, irritates you, captivates you, that intensity is a clue. It tells you that a hidden part of your psyche has been stirred. Every projection is an invitation to retrieve a piece of your soul. The one who enrages you may carry your denied aggression. The one who fascinates you may embody your neglected creativity. The one who disappoints you may hold your own disowned vulnerability. To withdraw projections is not to excuse others or erase their responsibility. It is to recognize that your inner world is not separate from the outer. The more you integrate what you project, the freer you become to meet others as they truly are. Imagine what it would feel like to no longer be ruled by unconscious triggers, to meet another human being not as a distorted mirror, but as a living soul. That is the freedom individuation offers. But the path to this freedom often feels like descent before it feels like ascent. Because to reclaim your projections, you must face the parts of yourself you had once buried. That means meeting your rage without collapsing into it, acknowledging your jealousy without being consumed by it, admitting your fear without letting it paralyze you. These emotions, when integrated, become sources of power, clarity, vitality. But when denied, they bind you, distort you, and seek expression through shadowy ways. You may notice as you turn inward the resistance of the ego. The ego fears losing control. It believes that if it surrenders its grip, it will be annihilated. But in truth, the ego is not destroyed by the self, it is expanded, placed into its rightful proportion. Individuation is not about erasing the ego, but about showing it that it is not the whole. When the ego bows to the deeper self, life opens in ways it never could have orchestrated on its own. Dreams will often accompany this surrender. At night, the unconscious brings images that defy your ego's neat categories. You may see yourself standing at the edge of a vast ocean, or walking through a dark forest, or confronting a stranger who feels uncannily familiar. Jung would say, do not dismiss these as meaningless. They are messages from the self-symbols of where you are in the journey. The ocean may call you to depth, the forest to exploration, the stranger to integration. The unconscious speaks in a language of image and symbol, and though it may seem obscure, your soul recognizes its truth. There is also a moment often surprising when the unconscious does not come as darkness but as grace. You glimpse beauty where before you saw only routine. You feel a sudden sense of belonging in the world, as though life itself were whispering your name. This too is the self at work, reminding you that individuation is not endless struggle. It is a weaving together of opposites, the descent into shadow and the ascent into light. Each informs the other. Without shadow there is no depth. Without light there is no direction. And then there is the figure of the anima or animus, arriving often in dreams, in art, in sudden infatuations. They come not merely to seduce or confuse you, but to open you to what is missing in your conscious identity. If you are rational and controlled, the anima may bring waves of emotion, creativity, receptivity. If you are nurturing and yielding, the animus may awaken clarity, strength, vision. These encounters can be overwhelming, but when engaged consciously, they bring balance. Jung saw them as mediators between the ego and the self, thresholds to a more integrated life. In this way, individuation is a constant movement between inner and outer, conscious and unconscious, masculine and feminine, light and shadow. It is not about becoming perfect, but about becoming whole. To live this way is to accept the paradox of your existence, that you are both limited and infinite, both broken and luminous, both human and divine. When you begin to live from that paradox, the rigidity of the persona softens. You no longer need to pretend. You no longer need to hide. You can stand as you are, imperfect yet whole. Perhaps now you feel both a weight and a liberation. The weight of realizing how much of your life has been shaped by unconscious forces, and the liberation of knowing that you are not condemned to remain asleep. The very act of seeing, of becoming conscious, is already a step toward freedom. Jung reminds us, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. To awaken is not a single moment, but a lifelong turning inward again and again until the fragments of the soul are gathered and the self can shine through. So notice now, where do your projections live? Who haunts your thoughts, stirs your emotions, refuses to leave your imagination? Rather than turning away, dare to look closer. Not at them, but at what they awaken in you. That is where the work begins. That is where the path of wholeness leads. As you journey deeper, you begin to see that the path of individuation is not only about healing wounds or reclaiming lost fragments of yourself. It is also about uncovering the deeper architecture of meaning that shapes your existence. For beneath the chaos of daily life, beneath the noise of the persona and the turbulence of the shadow, there is a guiding current. It does not shout, it whispers. It does not impose, it beckons. And when you attune to it, life itself begins to feel like a conversation between your soul and the mystery that surrounds you. This current often appears as synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that defy explanation by chance alone. A book falls open to the very passage you needed. A stranger speaks the words you were longing to hear. A dream image is mirrored in waking life. Jung believed synchronicities were glimpses of the self at work, the deeper self, aligning inner and outer worlds to guide you toward wholeness. To dismiss them as accidents is to miss their invitation. To honor them is to recognize that you are not moving alone through an indifferent universe, but participating in a larger pattern of meaning. Yet even as you glimpse these moments of alignment, the struggle of integration remains. You may find yourself resisting again, slipping back into old patterns, clinging to the safety of the persona. This is natural. Individuation is not a straight line, but a spiral. Each descent into the unconscious brings new insight. Each ascent into consciousness brings new responsibility. And often, just as you think you have found balance, another layer of the shadow emerges, asking to be seen. Do not mistake this for failure. It is depth. The self is inexhaustible, and each encounter expands you. The figures of the unconscious, too, return in new forms. The anima or animus may evolve as you integrate more of their qualities. What once appeared as alluring fantasy may transform into a guide, a source of wisdom and inspiration. Dreams that once felt chaotic may begin to weave together into a coherent narrative, a myth your own life is living out. Jung understood that individuation is the creation of a personal myth, a story in which all parts of yourself have a place, a story that carries you through suffering into meaning. And meaning is essential. Without it, suffering corrodes. With it, suffering transforms. Individuation does not erase pain. It deepens your capacity to hold it, to let it teach you. You begin to see that wounds are not merely obstacles, but openings. They break the hard shell of the ego, letting the self's light enter. They humble you, soften you, expand you. Jung once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." To awaken is to feel fully and without defense until what was once unbearable becomes the seed of wisdom. There will be times when you feel lost, as though you have descended too far, as though the darkness will never end. These are the moments of initiation. In myth, the hero always passes through the underworld before finding the treasure. So it is within you. When despair threatens, when the old identity dies and the new has not yet appeared, trust that this too is part of the process. Individuation requires death and rebirth, the death of illusions, the rebirth of authenticity. Out of the ashes of the old persona, the self rises with new clarity. The shift is subtle at first. You begin to notice that you react differently to life. What once triggered you now feels like a mirror. What once seemed random now feels connected. What once felt hollow now glimmers with meaning. And others may notice too. They may sense in you a groundedness, a presence, a depth. Not because you are perfect, but because you are real. The masks have softened, the projections have thinned, the fragments have begun to return. You are no longer split between who you show the world and who you are within. You are becoming whole. But individuation does not isolate you in some private sanctuary of the soul. Paradoxically, the more whole you become, the more deeply you connect with others. For when you no longer project your shadow onto them, you can meet them as they are. When you no longer cling to your persona, you can risk true intimacy. When you live from the self, you become a vessel of presence that invites others into their own depth. Individuation is not selfishness. It is the ground of authentic relationship. It is the healing of the false separations that keep us isolated in fear. Consider how different the world would be if more people undertook this path. Conflicts fueled by projection would dissolve. Hatred born of denied shadow would soften. Love idealized into obsession would transform into genuine connection. The collective too would heal through individuation. For Jung saw not only the personal unconscious, but the collective unconscious, the shared reservoir of archetypes and symbols that bind humanity. When you individuate, you are not only healing yourself, but participating in the healing of the whole. And perhaps you feel this already, that your own journey is not just yours, that your awakening touches others, that your courage to face your shadow gives permission for others to face theirs. Individuation is contagious. Wholeness radiates. And though the work is deeply personal, its ripples extend far beyond the boundaries of your own life. Now pause and feel what stirs in you as you hear this. Do you sense the call to turn inward, to listen more deeply, to withdraw the projections, and face the shadow? Do you feel the longing to live from the self, to embody both light and dark, masculine and feminine, conscious and unconscious as one? This is the heart of the path. This is the essence of individuation. Not a doctrine, not a technique, a journey of soul. And it begins always here now with your willingness to listen. And as you listen, something begins to shift. The boundaries you once thought so solid between you and the world, between your conscious mind and your unconscious depths, grow more fluid. You begin to sense that the self is not a private possession locked inside your skin, but something vaster, something that breathes through you and beyond you. Individuation is not about inflating the ego into a grander image. It is about surrendering to a greater center, one that connects you with life itself. In these moments of surrender, you notice that the symbols arising from dreams and synchronicities begin to weave a kind of inner guidance system. A symbol is never just a sign, never just a label. It is alive. It opens into layers of meaning, each unfolding as you grow. Jung saw symbols as doors between the conscious and unconscious, the language through which the self speaks. And when you allow those symbols to work on you, rather than dissecting them into mere concepts, they transform you from within. Perhaps you dream of a serpent coiled and radiant, both terrifying and beautiful. In one sense, it may symbolize instinct, danger, temptation. In another, it may symbolize healing, renewal, the shedding of old skins. Both are true. The serpent comes as shadow and light together, asking you to hold the paradox. And as you hold it, you realize that individuation is not about resolving every tension into a simple answer, but about living fully within those tensions, allowing them to deepen you until they transform. This capacity to hold paradox is one of the great gifts of individuation. The ego prefers certainty, clarity, either or. But the self lives in both and. You are both strong and vulnerable, both finite and infinite, both ordinary and divine. The moment you cling to one side, the other side returns through the shadow. Only when you accept both can you live in wholeness. Jung called this the union of opposites, the reconciliation that takes place at the level of the self. The work of holding opposites often shows itself in relationships. You may find yourself drawn to someone who embodies your neglected qualities, who awakens both desire and fear in you. This is the projection of the anima or animus, and when recognized, it can open the doorway to profound growth. Instead of idolizing the other or condemning them when they fall short of your ideal, you can ask, what is this person awakening in me? What part of my own soul are they carrying, and can I reclaim it so that my love becomes not possession but recognition? In this way, love itself becomes an instrument of individuation. Not love as fantasy or escape, but love as a mirror, a furnace, a sacred fire that burns away illusions and reveals the truth of who you are. When you withdraw the projection, when you integrate what the other reflects, love becomes less about grasping and more about being. Less about needing someone to complete you and more about walking beside another as you both move toward wholeness. But individuation also requires solitude. The silence of being alone is not emptiness, but a crucible where the unconscious can speak. The modern world fears silence, rushes to fill it with noise and distraction. Yet the self cannot be heard in constant clamor. It whispers in dreams, in intuitions, in subtle synchronicities that require stillness to perceive. To walk this path, you must learn to honor solitude as sacred ground, not as loneliness, but as communion with your own depths. In that silence, you may discover the archetypes stirring within you. The wise old man, the great mother, the hero, the trickster. These are not just myths from ancient cultures. They are living patterns in the collective unconscious, shaping the dramas of your own psyche. When one of them appears in your dreams or your imagination, it is not to entertain you. It is to guide you, to challenge you, to awaken you to a dimension of yourself that has long been hidden. And sometimes what arises is not guidance, but chaos, dreams that terrify, symbols that disturb, emotions that overwhelm. Here, too, lies the work of individuation, to trust that the unconscious is not trying to destroy you, but to balance you. If you are too rigid, it brings disruption. If you are too passive, it brings challenge. The unconscious is always seeking wholeness, and it will not allow the ego's one-sidedness to dominate forever. What feels like breakdown may in truth be breakthrough, the cracking of the old shell, so that new life can emerge. Through this breaking and remaking, you begin to glimpse the deeper mystery that individuation is not only psychological, but spiritual. The self is not merely a construct of the mind. It is the living image of wholeness, a symbol of the divine within. To encounter the self is to encounter something sacred, something that transcends your limited identity, yet is intimately woven into it. Jung described the self as both the smallest and the largest, the unique center of your being, and at the same time a reflection of the infinite. This recognition changes everything. Suffering is no longer meaningless. Shadows are no longer enemies. Projections are no longer prisons. They all become teachers pointing you toward a center that has always been guiding you. Life itself becomes the field in which the self reveals its patterns, not to enslave you but to awaken you. And as you surrender to this unfolding, you notice a quiet strength rising in you, a groundedness that does not depend on approval, a peace that does not vanish in chaos. You are no longer tossed about by every storm of the ego. You are rooted in something deeper, a center that cannot be shaken. This is not detachment in the sense of withdrawal, but presence, the ability to meet life fully without being consumed by it. From here, you begin to live differently. You no longer chase perfection because you see that wholeness already includes imperfection. You no longer seek salvation outside yourself because you feel the divine moving within you. You no longer fear the shadow because you know it is part of your own fullness. And though you still stumble, still grieve, still long, you do so with awareness, with depth, with meaning. This is the beginning of living from the self, not as a lofty idea, but as a lived reality. And once you taste it, you know that the journey can never be undone. And now, you arrive at the deepest threshold, the place where individuation reveals itself not only as a psychological necessity, but as a spiritual awakening. Until now, you have seen the self as the hidden center of your being, the wholeness that holds together light and shadow, conscious and unconscious. But as your journey deepens, you begin to sense that the self is not merely your private center. It is a doorway into the mystery that sustains all life. To awaken to the self is to awaken to something greater than yourself, a reality both intimate and infinite. This realization often comes with a paradoxical blend of humility and majesty. On one hand, you see with painful clarity how small your ego is, how limited your control, how fragile your roles and identities. On the other, you glimpse that within you lives an image of the eternal, a spark of the divine, a connection to what Jung once called the unus mundus, the one world where inner and outer psyche and matter, spirit and body, are united. In moments of synchronicity, in the language of dreams, in sudden waves of awe, you touch this unity. You feel yourself belonging not as a fragment adrift, but as a vital thread in the vast tapestry of existence. And here suffering itself begins to transform. You no longer ask only how to escape it, but how to listen to what it reveals. Pain becomes the alchemical fire through which the ego is purified, softened, and opened. Grief teaches you the depth of love. Fear reveals where life is inviting you into courage. Even despair, when endured consciously, becomes the ground of rebirth. The crucifixion of the ego is always followed by some form of resurrection, the rising of a self that knows its roots in something greater. You may feel in this process as though you are dying to who you once were, and in a sense you are. The persona cracks. The shadow emerges. The projections dissolve. The fantasies fall away. And what remains is raw, naked, unguarded. But in that nakedness, you discover authenticity. You are no longer living as an image, but as a soul. You are no longer confined to the small circle of your ego's desires, but drawn into the vast horizon of the self. This is why Jung described individuation as a religious experience in the deepest sense of the word, not adherence to dogma, but a reconnection with the sacred. To individuate is to recognize that the psyche itself is holy ground, that the images and symbols arising within you are not illusions, but revelations. Every dream is a scripture, every synchronicity a sacrament, every descent into shadow a ritual of initiation. The unconscious is not merely personal, it is the place where you meet the living mystery. And when you live from this place, your life becomes mythic. Not myth as fantasy, but myth as the deepest truth expressed in symbolic form. You begin to see that your struggles mirror the hero's descent into the underworld, that your longing echoes the archetype of the seeker, that your rebirth reflects the eternal cycle of death and renewal woven into all of nature. Individuation does not isolate you into private meaning. It situates your life within the larger story of humanity, within the timeless dance of archetypes. The final movement of this journey is integration, not the perfection of the ego, but the reconciliation of opposites within the self. Masculine and feminine, conscious and unconscious, light and dark, human and divine. Integration does not erase difference, but allows difference to belong. Wholeness is not uniformity, it is harmony. You feel it as a kind of inner spaciousness, an ability to hold complexity without fear. You can weep and rejoice in the same breath. You can grieve and give thanks at the same time. You can stand in uncertainty without losing your ground. This is what it means to live from the self. And yet, this is not an endpoint. Individuation is not a finish line you cross, but a lifelong unfolding. There will always be new shadows to meet new projections, to withdraw new dreams, to interpret new symbols, to integrate. The work does not end, but your relationship to it changes. No longer do you resist it as a burden. You embrace it as the rhythm of the soul's evolution. Each descent, each crisis, each awakening is another turn of the spiral, carrying you deeper into wholeness. Look within yourself now. Can you sense that spiral? Can you feel how your life has already been shaped by unseen hands? How every loss and every encounter has been guiding you towards something larger? This is the mystery of individuation, that even when you thought you were lost, the self was weaving meaning. Even when you thought you were broken, the self was holding you together. Even when you thought you were alone, the self was speaking through dreams, through synchronicities, through the silent movements of your heart. So the call is simple, though, never easy to trust this process. To surrender not to despair, but to depth. To let go of the fantasy of control and open to the reality of wholeness. To walk not away from the shadow, but through it. To live not only as an ego struggling to survive, but as a soul awakening to the self. And in the end, this is the meaning of spiritual awakening, not escape from the world, but deeper presence within it. Not transcendence that denies your humanity, but wholeness that embraces it. You do not become flawless, you become real. You do not become untouchable, you become fully alive. This is the gift of individuation. This is the path Jung offered, the path of becoming whole, the path of remembering that within you lives both the wound and the healer, both the question and the answer, both the darkness and the light. And when you embody that wholeness, you do not only heal yourself, you become a living invitation for others to do the same. Now breathe and let this truth settle in you. The self has always been here, waiting, guiding, whispering. And as you turn toward it, your life begins to reveal its hidden order, its sacred rhythm, its inexhaustible depth. This is where the journey leads. This is where awakening begins. This is where you find yourself whole,